You are listening to the Dare to Love podcast with your hosts, Sonica Tinker and Christian Peterson, founders of LoveWorks. Hi, and welcome to the podcast. Thanks for joining. Hey, today I am going to talk about an extremely common predicament that wreaks havoc in people's lives and in their relationships too. It's so common you probably did it today, the day before that, and the day before that, and I do it, Sonica does it, everyone does it at times. So I'm going to start with a few examples. A woman came into our office, let's call her Karen for this case. She was very upset and jealous because her husband was, as she said, attracted to other women. Now, what had happened was that she had come across a picture of a woman that he had liked on his Instagram account, and this set off a veritable jealousy attack in her, and she was feeling terrible. In fact, she had gotten so mad at him after this incident that she accused him of being unfaithful, and she threatened to divorce him. So you can imagine that created quite the stir. Another example, a man I was coaching, we'll call him Timothy for our example, was enraged with his girlfriend because she was always talking about how great her car was and how much she loved that car. So every time they'd go driving, she'd say, "I love this car. It makes me so happy driving it. It's an awesome car." And when he heard her say that, he'd feel this wave of anger arising inside him, and he'd have to clench his jaws in the hopes of not saying something nasty. But sometimes he just couldn't even help himself, and he ended up berating her for going on and on about her, in quotes, stupid car. So what do these two examples have in common? Well, first of all, both of these guys, Karen and Timothy, they both got really angry over their partner's behavior. And I'm sure you can relate to that experience, all too common. Your partner does or says something, it triggers a response in you that's sometimes more intense than even you had expected. And of course, it's not just our partners that say or do things that sets off strong emotions in us. It could just as well be your boss, one of your friends, your mom, and certainly anyone with children will know this experience all too well. Your kid says something, does something, and you have a pretty strong reaction to it. So the second thing that these two examples have in common is that both Karen and Timothy reacted out of anger in ways that afterwards they felt bad about, and which afterwards created a significant fallout, so that their own reactions actually created a whole new set of problems that they had to deal with. In Karen's case, she ended up with a really serious breakdown after her outbursts and accusations of her husband, and they now had to deal with that somehow. Timothy, on his hand, ended up having to apologize and backpedal after letting his girlfriend have it, basically. But even after apologizing, he still felt this strange anger, and she felt hurt, and she kept her distance for a while. Plus, of course, he just felt ashamed of himself for getting so mad in the first place. So there's all kinds of consequences. And third, and perhaps most importantly for our topic here, what they both have in common is that both Karen and Timothy shared a very common predicament that we're talking about today, and that is making sketchy conclusions based on sketchy evidence. Now, I'm going to ask a question that might sound a little odd at this time, but it'll make sense in a moment, so just bear with me. Have you ever read or seen the Hunger Games series? Well, in case you haven't, I'll just tell you briefly that we got our young protagonists of the story. Their names are Katniss and Peeta, and they go through all manner of harassment and adventures and awfulness at the hands of the, in quotes, evil empire. In the Hunger Games stories, it's called the Capitol. Now, Peeta is the boy. He is tortured and brainwashed to the point where he believes that his beloved Katniss, the girl in the story, is his mortal enemy, and he tries to kill her because he's so confused. So basically, the bad guys messed with his head so much that he can't tell friend from foe, love from hate, fantasy from reality. He can't tell what's real or not real. So when they get reunited, Katniss and Peeta make up a game. It's a test of sorts to help Peeta regain his sanity. So Peeta will say whatever he's thinking, and then he'll ask Katniss, real or not real. So he might say, For example, the war is over, real or not real. And she'll help him to say if that's real or not real. Or he might say, I'm safe now, real or not real. And Katniss will help him out. And in the final scene, they're all snuggled up in bed, and Peeta says, you love me, real or not real. And you might guess what her answer is. So why is that even relevant on this podcast and what we're talking about today? Well, it's relevant because both Karen and Timothy, although dealing with what seems to be very different situations, are in fact in a similar situation to Peeta in the Hunger Games. They don't know what's real or not real. They don't know what's true or not true, accurate or false. They don't know what's fantasy and reality, even as they're in it themselves. So Karen, for example, she sees an image on her husband's Instagram account, and she quickly makes several conclusions. She concludes that he's attracted to this woman on the picture. He's attracted to other women too. He's not attracted to her, Karen. And she concludes that she's not attractive, period. She concludes that he's unfaithful, he's lying, and he's deliberately keeping secrets from her. Are those real or not real? Now, Timothy, for his situation, when he hears that his girlfriend is talking about how much she loves her car, he makes several conclusions too. He concludes that she loves her car more than she loves him. She thinks that her car is better than his car. She thinks he's a loser because his car is a piece of junk. She thinks that he's not successful in life. And further, when he looks at it, he's realizing that he's concluding that he really isn't as successful as he should be in his life. Other guys are way more successful than he is, and that she's deliberately mocking his car and him. Are those real or not real? You are listening to the Dare to Love podcast with your hosts Sonika Tinker and Christian Peterson, founders of LoveWorks. When we talk more in depth with Karen and Timothy, it quickly becomes clear that they don't really know if any of these conclusions are real or not real. What is real is that they themselves have made up these conclusions based on the, in quotes, evidence at hand, which in each case is pretty skimpy evidence for these heavy-handed and heavy-feeling conclusions. What is real and factual is that Karen saw an image of a woman on her husband's Instagram. And what is real and factual is that Timothy's girlfriend said the words, "I really love my car." But beyond those simple facts, everything else are made up conclusions that may or may not have any real basis. So how do you tell the difference between reality and fantasy, between what has, solid grounding and what totally doesn't? Well, one way is to simply ask yourself, just like Peeta did in the Hunger Games, real or not real? And sometimes it'll be immediately evident to you if it's real or not real. For example, granted this was with my help in the coaching session, when Timothy asked himself and realized that he was making these conclusions that his girlfriend was deliberately mocking him based on her saying she loves her car, he immediately said, "Oh no, that's totally not real. She'd never do that. As a matter of fact, that's ridiculous." And you'll notice that sometimes the stuff we conclude is flat out ridiculous when you slow it down enough that you can actually take a good look at it, just like Timothy did here. And then the other thing you can do is you ask the other person, or persons, if there are more than one, who are involved. So in Karen's instance, she wasn't sure if her conclusions were real or not real, so we'd recommend that she ask her husband about it. Now, when you ask your partner or someone if your conclusions or assumptions are real or not, try saying it this way. When I saw a picture of so-and-so on your Instagram, I made up that you're attracted to her and that you're not attracted to me. Is there any grain of truth to that? When you say it like that, it's a way to ask for help to sort out what's real or not real and what's, freely made up in your mind and what might have some merit to it. So, and actually, a word of caution here, okay? When you ask your partner about this kind of stuff, do not say, Hey, you always have these skanks show up on your profile. Are you sleeping around with them too? You know, don't make accusations before you know what's going on. As both Karen and Timothy figured out, that is, when you react unconsciously from your jealousy or your hurt or your anger, you end up with secondary problems to clean up. But by including the words, when so-and-so happened, I made up that, you're acknowledging that the conclusions you made could be just that, like purely made up conclusions that have no grounding in reality. And when you ask directly, like this, you might sometimes discover that some of your conclusions do indeed have a solid basis. Sometimes your partner might say, yeah, there is a bit of truth to that, which could open up some really juicy conversations if you're willing to go there, which is that's a topic for a whole other podcast. The main point I want to make here is that we all suffer from this predicament of making up sketchy conclusions based on sketchy evidence. And often these conclusions are flat out damaging to our own well-being and to the health of our relationships. When Timothy makes up that his girlfriend is telling him he's not successful enough, it's more of a reflection of his own lifelong fear that he's not successful. But by making the conclusion that she's putting him down, he gets to put his attention on her, in quotes, bad behavior, rather than looking in the mirror and face his own fears about his own value. Like in his example, all that was happening is that she loves her car, plain and simple. That's it. The rest is straight out of his own mind factory. So make sure that you don't believe your own conclusions too readily, especially the ones that make you feel like crap. If you've ever come across the work of Byron Katie, which is known simply as The Work, you might remember that the entire basis of her work is to inquire about your own thoughts by asking a few questions, two of which are, is it true? And next, can I be absolutely certain that it's true? And often with the conclusions we make in our relationships and in life about my own value, they're not true, and I can definitely not be sure they're true. So questioning your own conclusions might just set you free from, the occasional madness that happens in your own mind. And it definitely opens up a ton more space for love, for inquiry, for connection, for not reaction, for not going off at each other, for not the secondary problems that often show up on the heels of this. It can free up a ton of space and love in your relationships. What do you think? Real or not real? Hey, thanks so much for listening in today. We look very forward to being with you. I look very forward to being with you again. Until then, take care. You have been listening to the Dare to Love podcast with Sonika Tinker and Christian Peterson, co-founders of LoveWorks. And hey, if you found this podcast to be valuable, would you hit the share button and go ahead and share this with your friends on Facebook, Twitter, or wherever your favorite hangouts are. Thanks so much for sharing the love.